Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Rachel, and I'm a marketing coordinator here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com or by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. In the coming days, we're looking forward to welcoming Rebecca Roanhorse on October 14th to discuss her book, Black Sun. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Maaza Mengiste and Hannah Giorgis. Maaza Mengiste was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, a Fulbright scholar and professor in the MFA in Creative Writing and Literary Translation program at Queen's College. She's the author of The Shadow King and Beneath the Lion's Gaze, named one of The Guardian's 10 best contemporary African books. Her work can be found in The New Yorker, Granta, and The New York Times, among other publications. She lives in New York City. A finalist for the Booker Prize, The Shadow King is an epic novel about the majesty and influence of women warriors during the Second Italo-Ethiopian War, and lifts to the forefront the unassailable power of women's courage and prowess in conflicts throughout history. Hannah Giorgis is a culture writer at The Atlantic. Her work has appeared in publications including the New York Times Magazine, The New Yorker, Bon Appetit, Lifted Brow, and Addis Ababa Noir, the short story anthology edited by Maaza Mengiste. This evening's event will also include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. And if someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please consider upvoting that particular question. And most importantly, please consider supporting Maaza and Powell's by purchasing a copy of The Shadow King. A link to buy her book will be shared in the chat throughout the evening. And without any further ado, please welcome Maaza and Hannah.
Hi, thank you, Rachel. Awesome. I'm so excited to chat with you again today.
Oh, Hannah, it's so nice to see you again. We're wearing our Habesha kameez.
Oh yes, let me make that a little more visible. So I obviously had the pleasure of talking with you about the book last year when it first launched. But for those who don't know, could you tell us a little bit about The Shadow King in your own words?
Yes. Well, The Shadow King is a novel that is set during Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia in 1935, and it tells the story of the invasion and the war. But one thing I discovered while I was researching this was that women were involved, and they were involved much more heavily with the war than I first thought. I started finding stories of women in the front lines, and this book is about women who join the front lines with men. And one of the characters is a maid named Hirut, and the woman that she works for, Astaire, is the wife of a nobleman named Kidane. And Kidane is getting his army together, and Astaire says, why can't the women join too? So the story is about Astaire and eventually Hirut, who fight in this army with the men. And I tell the story from their perspective, but I also tell the story from the Italian perspective, because I was really interested in what they thought that they were doing and what their lives might have been like during that war.
Yeah, absolutely. I have several questions for you about that specifically. But before we get to that, I was wondering if you could just read us a little bit so folks sort of have a sense of what it sounds like and what the cadence of the book is.
Sure. I will read from a section here when Astaire is encouraging the women to do more than what they're doing right now, which is, carrying water, serving the food. She wants them to get more active. And this is at a moment in that early on in the book. Okay. Astaire is a glorious figure astride her horse Bunna. She has loosened her braids, and thick strands of hair fall across her neck and spread like a dark curtain around her sunlit face. She snaps the animal to a trot across the crest of the hill, her cape fanning around her figure, the golden clasp trapping flints of afternoon light. Women, she shouts, sisters, are you listening to me? Her voice rises into the sky, a blade slicing through the valley below, startling the women from their tasks, forcing them to lift their heads and turn in her direction. Sisters, are you ready for what's to come? Ethiopia's gifted Asmari will sing of this day for years, of how the women drop their baskets and their jugs, how they push away their looms and piles of wool. They rise to their feet nearly in unison, unaware of their own glory, and lift their faces towards Astaire's voice. That they pause long enough to listen to the soft tap of distant gunfire is a detail that the songs will repeat again and again. The musicians will make of the women's frowns a forewarning of what's to come. The singers will use the women's gasps and exclamations as signs of their growing strength. One Asmari after the next will sing these words as they play their masinko. That first battle cry was already forming in the women's throats. Astaire knew she just needed a way to usher it out. The women were ready but did not know it. There were bullets to be made and gunpowder to mix and rifles to load and enemies to shoot. Women, those who can make bullets, come to me. Astaire's voice carries across the valley before breaking into echoes and scattering into the horizon. She is one woman. She is many women. She is all the sound that exists in the world. And then I'll stop there.
Thank you. You know, I think about that line that the women were ready but did not know it a lot. And, you know, as I go back and sort of reread it, sits with me a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, one thing I've been thinking about is that both of your books are sort of set during periods of tremendous transition and upheaval for Ethiopia. And, you know, for the continent more broadly also. I would love to hear a little bit about what draws you to these periods of transition and intensity politically, and what, you know, what you think readers might learn from them.
Well, you know, my first book was set in 1974, or it opened in 1974 during the revolution in Ethiopia. And that moment was really pivotal to my life. I feel like it's pivotal to almost every Ethiopian who is in the United States or anywhere in the diaspora. It's why so many of us had to leave the country. And being here in the United States, I think like many immigrants, I would often wonder what brought me here. You know, why am I here? Why am I not back with my family, back in the land where I was born? And, you know, I knew on one level that it was because of the revolution, but I had memories of that. But every time I would ask my family to explain to me why I remembered something, how is it that I know this and this? What happened to this person? Why were they taken by these people? You know, I could remember those things as a child, but I didn't have any context for it. And I would ask my family, and they did not want to talk about this. We didn't really discuss this in my home. So, you know, a child gets curious, and I started trying to find out what they were not telling me. I was trying to understand my own memories, and that's the, you know, the foundation for that first book. But, you know, it's also interesting to think about 1935 and this Italian invasion. When we think of 1935 and that Italian invasion, as Ethiopians, I think we also automatically think of the Battle of Adwa, you know, in 1896. These two things go hand in hand, and it's always because Italy tried to invade, and both times they were defeated. And I grew up with these stories in Ethiopia. When I came here to the United States, those stories were in some ways my best defense against the American racism, against the difficulties of being in this country. And so when people would make fun of me, whether, you know, because I had an accent or I'm African, and they imagined that, you know, I didn't have any history, I knew my history was much longer than theirs. And I understood the people I came from. That kept me going here. And so this felt like just an automatic place also to look when I was thinking about another book to write. This story that had been so inspiring to me and had seemed to form part of my identity, and I think forms Ethiopian identity, felt like a place to start also. But you know, the thing with these kinds of stories is that the minute you start looking into them, it gets more and more and more complicated. For a novelist, that's wonderful. But it's also really tricky territory, because it's not that history is not just a history of heroism and, you know, a dignified fight. There was so much else going on, and I wanted to explore just a small part of it, beginning with women and really focusing on women.
Absolutely. I mean, I was just going to say, what does fiction enable you to do that other forms don't?
Wow. Well, I could, with fiction, I can in some ways speak to Haile Selassie, you know, in the book in 1935, and basically say, what the hell were you doing? Sorry, peeps. I'm sorry if someone's going to get upset. But, you know, it's, you know, because it was in my research that I discovered the story of Zanaburg. And Zanaburg was his daughter. She was 14 when she was sent off to be married to a man who was almost 50. And she begged in those years, the 2 years that she lived there, she begged to come home. She was sending messages back about being mistreated, about being abused, about the cruelties of that family. But she was sent there because that family wanted to usurp the power of the throne. So what does the emperor do but say, well, here's my daughter, let's form an alliance.
Right.
And when I was writing a story about women and girls and the place that they have in war and in conflict, I didn't really intend to write about him, but I was like, my God, how can I do that? How can I write this about women and girls and really not also think about Zanaburg and what happened? Because she was married to this man in order to create a unity between the families, an alliance. But when the Italians came in, ironically, after she died, when the Italians came in, the man who was her husband was one of the first collaborators with Italy. So he basically was like, screw you, still to the throne. So her death and her life was useless. It was just the death was pointless. And I couldn't get that out of my mind. One of the things that my character Hirut says at some point to herself is, isn't a girl worth as much as a country? You know, aren't I my own country? When she's being asked to fight, but then things are happening with her from men in her own camp, from one man within the camp. She's like, wait, why am I fighting for Ethiopia when you're supposed to be on my side and you're doing this to me? Right. You know, so there are all these complications that came up, and fiction allows me to deal with this because history often erases those kinds of stories for the sake of the larger narrative, which is the victory.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
How did you, as you were writing, how did you think about holding both those sort of macro, larger struggles and kind of the interpersonal ones at the same time, and sort of mixing and the interplay between those scenes?
I think I really had to really had to stay focused. I wanted to keep these women and these girls central. And so I just followed them throughout the war. There's so many other things happening, but I wanted to tell this story through them, which meant that the story is really the story of Hirut and Astaire in war. But I wanted to honor those women and girls that I know were part of this war, whether willingly or unwillingly. I wanted to pay respect to what I understood were probably many horrors and struggles that they went through that they would never talk about, because we don't talk about those things in Ethiopian communities. They had their own struggles with people within their own community, within their home, but they were also dealing with levels of abuse from the Italian side. And the women were fighting 2, 3, 4 different kinds of wars all at once. And so I wanted to focus on that.
Yeah, absolutely. to take a step back for a moment, as you've been talking about these women, and I know I've heard you speak a little bit about what your research process was like and finding photos and being in Italian flea markets. And it occurs to me that some of the folks listening right now and tuning in maybe haven't heard that. So I'd just love for you to tell us a little bit about how you went about researching, kind of where things took you after those first sets of questions that you were asking maybe family or the people around you.
You know, initially I moved to Rome so that I could do this research. I was on a fellowship and I was working in the archives. I was sitting there, you know, in libraries, looking up old newspaper accounts, reading telegrams, reading these books that officers, that government officials had left, trying to get a sense of the full scope of the war. And really, you know, quickly it was hitting me that, wait a minute, all these things were fascist approved documents. You know, these newspapers were written and they were censored and then printed. So what I was reading was a very curated version of a war. It was a fascist version. And I was thinking about, you know, what to do with this. And at some point during this, it happened that I was on tour for my first book, which was set in 74 during this revolution. And I went to the southern part of Italy in Calabria. And I think I've told you this story before. So I went there, and the one thing I understood about the Italian military was that the northern part of Italy, which is more industrialized, had more money, was where the officers came from because they went to military school. And then the southern part of Italy, Sicily, those places were the farmers. It was the poorer part of Italy. Those poor men, meaning they were of lower economic status, were often the foot soldiers. So when I was going into the southern part of Italy, I said, I know a lot of these soldiers that were in Ethiopia, that were actually having contact with Ethiopians, came from that area. I wonder if I'm going to run into any part of this history there. And I was in this bookstore in this small town and talking about my book of 1974. And a man stood up and he said, I want to speak about 1935. And you could hear the room tense up and get quiet. And I think some people were just saying, come on, sit down. We're not talking about this. And he was really, really emotional. And he said, my father was a pilot during that war. And he said, he dropped the poison on your people. And by this point, he was shaking and starting to cry. And he said, how do you forgive me? And I did not know what to say to that. I was getting a little emotional. Everybody else was upset in the room. And he said, please don't leave. Please don't leave until I come back. He left. I was answering questions, talking to some people afterwards. He rushed back and he had a set of papers. Well, he had something he had made himself, with photographs taken by his father during that war, his father's diary entries, information about what bombs were dropped, you know, pictures of his father with the bombs, pictures on the plane. And he gave them to me and he said, please do something with this. And when he said that, I realized, my God, these men were keeping their own documents. They were taking their own photographs. Those things were not censored. They were taking them back home and keeping them in their closets, in their drawers. And I said, okay, how do I find this? And I started going to flea markets across Italy. All these, you know, Rome, I had a vendor, I had a man, he had my number. And every time he had something, I would get a text. He's like, come over.
Sure.
I was like, here I go, you know. So I had that, but I would go into these little towns And what I found was that almost not almost, every place I went had a fascist table. And every place had something about Mussolini and about Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia. Every place, they know who we are. Even if they want to act like they have forgotten, they know that history, or they know about it. And I would just go to those tables and start looking for photographs, looking for letters. I would get two different reactions, usually from these vendors. Some of them would just say, "Let me help you." As soon as they saw me coming and they saw my face and recognized it as East African, they were ready to help. And then there were people who saw me, and the first thing they would say is, "Get away from here." You know, would take the things out of my hands, pull a box away, say, "Get out." And usually I traveled with an Italian friend, so I would just leave, but I would see what I wanted and then tell them to go back and get it. So I have stuff. And that was part of the research for this book, was all these documents that these soldiers did not realize was telling me, or would tell someone like me, another side of the war, the side of the war that the fascists did not want to remember.
Absolutely. Photographs. Sorry, I'm thinking about people sort of physically taking stuff out of your hands.
Oh, they did that a lot. And then this.
Yeah, that specific gesture, right? But before I fixate too long on that, photographs play such a big role in the book, and as somebody who's known you for a while and has seen your Instagram feed even and the feed for the book, I've really enjoyed the way that photos have kind of been part of the storytelling of this. But I sort of would love to hear how you think of photography and writing and the relationship between the two.
Well, I think the work of both the image and the word is to create a narrative. And that's the thing that attracts me to photography, is this ability to approach something with a philosophy, with an understanding of its history, with an understanding of some kind of context, and then make something from that other people can look at, can read, can interpret on their own. I just got asked recently why I don't call myself a photographer, because it's not on my bio, but I like to make images. I think it's, I've had to think about that, and I think it's because I understand that the depth of a really good photograph, that it can have the same depth as a novel, as a book. It's something that keeps you coming back to look at again and again. We've seen some of those images, and I'm still working on that in a way that I feel very comfortable calling myself a novelist, because I've earned my scars on this.
We'll come back to that in a second.
I'm still working towards this a photographic narrative. It's still a craft that I'm working towards, and I respect it, and I respect people who are really doing it too well to just slip it on.
I don't know about that, but fine, we'll take it. To come back to your battle scars, I'm sorry to do this, but one of the things I remember is that you've spoken about sort of scrapping the first draft of this book. And one of the things that I think about, sort of knowing that we have, I'm sure, a decent number of Ethiopian young people watching now, is that pursuing a creative path or a craft is something that there's not necessarily blueprints for, right? But especially coming here. So I'd just love to hear from you a little bit about what it felt like to do that, to scrap this big draft that you already had, and then where that sort of took you from there.
When I finished that draft, part of it is, we grow up in these Abusha families. We grow up in these immigrant homes, and the greatest thing in the world you could be is a doctor. It's like just across the board. It doesn't even matter whether you're Ethiopian or not. It's just a doctor is God. But I had already fought those battles with my family. I had finished one book, which thankfully stopped all their complaints, kind of. But then when I started on the second book, it was like, my God, didn't you get that out of your system? Right? There's never, it's just never enough. And I finished this draft and it just wasn't good. And so you can imagine the panic too. It's like, oh my God, you know, my mother's gonna make me like apply for med school.
Law school in my house.
Oh God, law school, yes, too late for med school. But yeah, that's, and I said, oh my, but it wasn't good. It just wasn't good. And I think I was so disappointed and so distraught by that draft that the idea of getting rid of it and starting all over again, which was what I did, was freeing, much more freeing than being burdened with a draft that I would keep trying to rewrite. I just said, there's nothing here that's working. It is not good. I've got to get it out. But you know what happens when you do that, when you think that you can't get any worse, then I said, that means I can do anything I want now. Now I can write without fear because I've done the bad. So what is it that I want to do? What do I really want to do? And if I'm going to fail, at least I'll do it in a way that I'm doing something I wanted. I'll fail towards the next book. Whereas this other one, the other one was a failure down. At least I can fail towards something.
I mean, to be clear, you did not fail. So.
No, you didn't read that first draft. You did not read it.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. But
it was, yeah. So I think that was for me. It's just anything can happen now. Anything is possible now. What do you want to do? And it was, I gave myself full freedom, and I really had fun with this in a way that I didn't have with that first book.
Yeah, there are so many moments where I could kind of feel the fun coming through when you reference the Asmari, when you have these sort of moments of the chorus. And I thought a lot about how multiple women's voices come together. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about those inspirations, actually.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking when I was writing this, there was a moment when was the scene? I think one of the first scenes when Astaire does something early on in the book, and she gets up, and then I heard this voice saying, she wants you to think this is what happened. And then I said, okay, let's see what's happening here. And then all of a sudden it's like, that's not what happened, and we're going to tell you what really happened. I thought, oh my God, this is fun. This is like the Asmari. You know, this is like the way that they make, you know, the funniest jokes. They embarrass people in public.
Sure
I can imagine them. Yeah, right. I can imagine them in 1935 in the villages, you know, talking about who's doing what, who's having an affair. Oh, you think this is happening, you know? But they were also the keepers of history, the keepers of village, you know, the knowledge in a place. So when these battles are happening, of course it's being passed down through song. Of course these people that have become great in different battles are remembered and recorded through the way that the villagers speak of each other. And the Asmari pick that up and keep that going. And I really wanted to honor that. And what was interesting was, I know that Homer did it. I know that the Greek tragedies do it. And people, and I, you know, I've often said, yeah, it is like the Greek tragedies, but hey, Ethiopians were doing it for as long as the Greeks. The Greeks didn't invent this. It's like Africans have been doing it. The Asians have been doing it. The Greeks just were part of this tradition of storytelling through song. We've always done it. So for me, even the chorus, which is, you know, the Greeks wrote it down, but Ethiopians and Africans have been doing it for millennia. And I wanted to honor that tradition that we have, which is for me one of the most beautiful things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, and like you said, it's just fun, you know. It brings some levity, some joy to scenes that can be otherwise
those women
heavy.
Hannah, when they sing some of the things,
yep.
yeah, they're fun.
Absolutely. You know, and one of the things I really enjoyed about the Asmari reference is that there are people for whom the Asmari or certain kinds of social life are not considered particularly respectable, sort of women,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I thought about that in the context of the novel more generally, just in the sense that so often as writers of color, Black writers, immigrant writers, there's a way that the literature is framed not just as story, but as sort of an explanation of what people are like, right? Like it's a sort of famed idea that somebody said to Chinua Achebe, I didn't know all Nigerian men beat their wives, right? Like there's the idea that you have to sort of represent everybody. How did you think about that? Did you think about that at all as you were writing, especially some of the heavier and sort of more conflict-filled scenes?
You know, I wanted to write less about characters than maybe about personalities. I wanted to work with not women that I thought would be like Ethiopian women, but I wanted to write women who were just themselves, women who might have been living within a certain society, but they were moving by their own rules often, which is, I'm sorry, but this is the way we are. Look, there's so many rules in Ethiopian culture, and I don't know anyone who follows all of them.
No, it's exhausting. There's no way anybody can.
There's no way, but we have them, and everybody will say, oh, she shouldn't do that, or he shouldn't do that, but hey, people do things anyway. And so I thought these women are they're doing what they would do because of their personality. And they may run up against cultural norms, but I wondered what Astaire would do. Which ones would she follow because they benefit her? Yeah. But which ones would she fight against because she feels that they're constrictive? And the same thing with Hirut. You know, she'll follow some because she feels like maybe she has to, but in her mind, she's saying, wait a minute, I'm not going to do this for much longer. And the person I thought that was really interesting was the cook, who moves outside of all of that, you know, who really doesn't seem to get along with Hirut very well or Astaire, but in some way she protects them both, even, you know, up to, you know, she protects them. She was an interesting figure for me. It's somebody that was just outside of that society. Everything had been taken away from her. Her home, she was taken away from her home. She has a name, but she refuses to give that up. She's working for Astaire, but you know, she's an enslaved person. And she said, they've taken everything, but they won't take my name. And she works and lives outside of those societal rules. And Farah's Fifi, whoops, I gave that away. Fifi is, you know, she's a paid escort, and she's not victimized. She doesn't feel like a victim. She's actually, you know, well aware of what she's doing, and she's getting something out of it and makes no apologies of it. So I was interested in those personalities, all these women moving outside of all those rules.
Right.
And because that's how society is. It's very rarely a group of people that follow every rule that they set for others.
Right, and that's not a story also, that's
right.
Just, you know,
yeah.
series of
and those are not interesting people.
No, not at all, right? Like every happy family is the same, yeah? Like
that's exactly.
You know, I would love to hear a little bit about sort of who kind of, whether it's women authors, who sort of inspired your own small rebellions, whatever they've been over the years, in the text or otherwise.
Yeah, you know, it's, I remember when I was in college and the first time I read an African woman, that was in college when I read, really, yeah. And it was in a literature class, and I read this Ghanaian writer, Ama Ata Aidu, and Our Sister Killjoy. And I remember my world changed then, because suddenly I felt like somebody had seen me. Somebody had written a story about an immigrant, an African woman. And I thought, I didn't know that books like this were existed. I really felt like someone had seen me in many ways. So she was fundamental, that book was fundamental to my understanding of what literature could do, the way that it could help you understand your place in the world. And I don't know, I've read so much, but she's one of them. Toni Morrison, for me, felt like I learned from her. Reading her books is like taking a class. And
Every sentence.
Right? Every sentence, I'm thinking, how does she do it? Wait, let me look at this again. And so I still go back and look at that work because they are master classes in form and language and just storytelling.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I have to say, in terms of storytelling, my family, we can sit around, you know, we've all had these gatherings where families sit around, my family would sit around, and my parents were such good storytellers. You know, my father could make an entire room collapse in laughter. My mother could hold people's attention as she's telling something. And I remember at some point watching them going, how do they do that? So I was always paying attention and trying to emulate that as well.
Absolutely. You know, I want to make sure we have time for questions, but
Yeah,
really quickly before that, I'd just love to hear a little bit about what you're excited about now, what you're looking forward to. Obviously, we're in rather chaotic times, but what keeps you going?
Well, you know, what am I looking forward to now? We're not going to talk about these current situations, but I'm really, it's been inspiring to me to look at the art that's coming out of Ethiopia, the photographers, the painters, those visual artists, the writers, the other writers that are part of Addis Ababa Noir. It's really, that's amazing. That's the work of the future that's happening there. And that makes me really excited.
Yeah, me too. It'll be great to see more of that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You know, there's space in the little Q&A section for folks to add more. So please feel free to do that. But we can jump ahead and get to this if you don't mind. We have one from an anonymous attendee who just, this is, thank you for blessing us with your presence and Abhishek Emis. Thank you. As you contextualize the story of Astaire and other women in today's dominant narrative of Western-centric feminism, what would you share with us about Afrocentric feminism, which seems undertold?
I think the thing is that Astaire and Hirut are not, is that what they mean? Like, they're not looking towards the West for their own definitions of feminism. Is that what that means? I'm not quite sure I understand.
I'm understanding that a little bit more as where the novel and where the kinds of feminism, if we want to call it that, exhibited in the novel fit into sort of modern.
Like a broader, I think it's interesting. I mean, that's interesting because having these conversations with friends of mine who are writing on the continent of Africa, we are having the similar conversations about how can we tell stories that are our stories. Then we're telling them, we are writing not for a Western audience. Whether if the West likes it, that's great.
Right.
But it's not writing for a Western audience. It's to affirm something about the African continent that centers Africa, that centers African women. I'm still waiting, and let's see what happens. I'm still waiting for some British people to say, why are there no British in this book? Because we came in and won the war. You know, and this is part of that narrative that's happening again and again. The British came in and won. I said, actually, no. I have not been asked that yet, which has been really good, but it was another one of these things where I said, Ethiopians were fighting this war for 5 years. The British count that this war lasted 1 year when they got in. Yeah. And I wanted to tell that 5-year war from the perspective of the people who had really suffered on the ground for all of that. And that maybe that's part of that maybe that's what the questioner, the person is meaning about that Afrocentrism. This is about centering those histories that are undertold, as opposed to thinking about how to accommodate the West in that history, because this is world history, but it's set in Africa, which is still part of the world.
Right, absolutely. And you know, it's interesting that obviously a lot of the characters wouldn't identify as feminists. It's not a term that would necessarily make sense for the times, right? But are still rebelling in ways that we might identify, kind of looking backward.
Like you can't impose the 21st century definitions of what feminism is on people who were living in 1935. We can't impose Western ideals of what a woman would do or should do on women of 1935, especially in Ethiopia and especially in different parts of Africa. And that's, two different things.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to bring us to the current moment for a second because we have a question that basically says, which stories are most memorable from the songs you discovered that can speak to our current context?
Like the Shalala.
Mm-hmm.
It's these songs. There were songs that fighters would sing just before battle, and they it would galvanize them to go and charge. They were songs of bravery. They would talk about what they were going to do to the enemy when they went across the battle lines. These were sung. They were rhythmic. They were, and sometimes the phrases were repetitive. I've heard some of these that the Italians recorded when from 1936. They're incredible to hear. And I mean, in terms of our context, I can imagine that protesters and people involved in the uprisings happening all around the globe and in this country would play some of these songs. And the words were always about bravery. They were always about, we are going to do this. And most of those songs were a declaration of their willingness to sacrifice everything. Or they would talk about their heroes. So I imagine that those would be some of the songs that we would use for now.
Certainly not Fachatanera.
Yes, certainly not.
No. There's a question here that asks what you think of fantasy set in Ethiopia, and what would you like to see it explore?
Fantasies. Like speculative fiction. Wow. There's so much that someone can do with this. Ethiopia is a land of, the history is so old, the beliefs are so old. It's a land of both myth and hard concrete reality, and that mix is what makes it, for me, really an interesting place and complicated. So I think it's anything. You can make anything. I mean, we can go to Aksum, we can go to all those ancient castles, but I think that the country is wide open for anything like that. Ethiopia's, it just feels like a land that's hovering on different planes of time. And for anyone who's interested in doing something with that, it's wide open.
Absolutely. And if I may, there's two stories or two books that I think of that kind of do that. There's a story that Gabriel Tedros, who's a Pacific Northwest Ethiopian, wrote for Octavia's Brood, which is a collection of science fiction stories, kind of taking the perspective that organizing is science fiction because it's creating a world we haven't seen yet.
Yeah.
But Gabe's story, the churches at Lalibela are a kind of portkey, a kind of portal to a different world, and that's sort of all I'll say about that. It's in Octavia's Brood.
I'm gonna get that.
Mm-hmm. And then Nafote Tamrat wrote The Parking Lot Attendant, a novel that came out, I believe, 2017. I'm losing track of time. But that also sort of has some fantasy, some genre happening there, and that pulls in some Ethiopia stuff. So those are places to start.
That's a beautiful book.
Absolutely. Are there authors you turn to when you're struggling to write or to convey an idea the way you want to? Authors whose descriptions or character development or something else inspire you?
I read a lot of poetry. I've been reading a lot of poetry these days. That's helped me with my focus. That's helped me with just moving into the world of words and ideas. Excuse me. And I think one of my favorite poets is Aracelis Girmay.
Oh, yes.
Amazing. Black Maria, I think it's the Black Maria, is one of her latest books. She's just an amazing writer. Matam Shafarao. Oh my gosh, she's so good. Fuchsia is one of her books. Her work is just absolutely stupendous. So I've been reading anything like that I can get my hands on. Poetry mostly. I mean, I read these two women, but for some reason the work of these old ancient poets, the Polish, writing in the 30s, writing as Poland is falling, and as it's under different kinds of control, have spoken to me as an Ethiopian. It's as if they understand exactly how to see different parts of Ethiopian history, and I go to them again and again also.
We have two sort of social media adjacent things. There's one side shout out to your Bridal Ethiopia tweet, which I'd love you to briefly explain for those who don't know.
Oh my gosh, in these horrendous times, I have not done the Bridal, and I need to. But I just, at some point, I don't even remember, 2 years ago or something, I started this hashtag Bridal Ethiopia and asked people to send me photographs anytime they saw a Volkswagen Beetle on the road in Ethiopia or wherever. I've now received them from Somalia. I've received them from Lebanon. I've received them from, like Serbia. But it's just this thing. The Beetle for me was such an important part of my childhood memories in Ethiopia. I don't know if you could grow up in Ethiopia without recognizing that. Any visit, they're everywhere now, and it's always felt to me like the car of Ethiopia. And when I get those photographs from people when they're driving down the street, it makes me feel like there's a part of me that's still back home. So if anyone has photographs, send them on. My mother sends me them now. And I love it. Yeah.
And then the other sort of social media adjacent thing was a question about wanting to hear more about the book Sister Joy and how we can find you on Instagram.
Our Sister Killjoy, I think, is still available. It was published decades ago. But it is still available, Our Sister Killjoy, and you should be able to find it in bookstores, or you can ask for it, and definitely I think you can find it at the libraries. And on Instagram, I'm under my name, at Maaza Mengiste, and you can follow me there. And if you would like to see archival photographs that I've been collecting that influence the Shadow King, on Instagram, it's the Shadow King novel. At the Shadow King novel. And but if you go to my site, you can find the link to that as well.
There's two here that I'm sort of selfishly going to jump to, one of which is, do you have any advice for young Ethiopian writers?
Oh, right. Read. If your parents discourage you, you should understand that they're doing it because they love you and they want you to be okay, and they want to make sure that you can support yourself. And most people know it's very tough as a writer, which is why I teach. I'm a professor. But read. That is really the thing. Read everything you can. Find your favorite writer and read everything they've written, and then read interviews by them and find their favorite writer and then read everything they've written. That's how I got my education really as a writer, by following the influences of people I liked.
Yeah, and sort of tracking people's trajectories even and their growths and seeing that is great. Yeah, I always like to tell people that I think my mom is still watching this, so she can attest sort of distantly, but she loved to tell people that she wasn't quite sure I was going to get a job when I went to school for English and African American studies. Look, it's funny now because I do have one, but let's see. And then the other one is a compliment about the dresses, but somebody said when they first read an extended comment on your book for a nomination and a prize in England, and made them wonder, is your book translated in Amharic? And I'd actually just love to hear you speak sort of additionally just about wrestling with writing in English when so often the stories are in Ethiopian, and how you sit with and think about language.
Yeah, well, first, the book is not yet being translated in Amharic, but I'm happy to say that Addis Ababa Noir will soon be printed and distributed in Ethiopia. It is happening. So I'm glad, and with the Amharic translation, we are looking for someone now to do that. So someone who can do literary translation, that's been a bit of the challenge. So I'm hoping that it happens soon. I'm really hoping that, but I have faith that will come about. And in terms of language, my book is written in English, but it's dealing with characters who speak Amharic and speak Italian. And I really had to figure out how I was going to balance the different languages in there. That was a bit tricky. But I write in English, but I know that English is my language, that I have molded that language to fit my memories, fit my history, fit my purposes. So I felt very comfortable with that. But in terms of my characters, I had to work on that, because there were times when Hirut is speaking and my Italian character Ettore shouldn't understand her because she's speaking Amharic, and how would I play that on the page? And when Ettore is speaking Italian, Hirut won't understand him. But there were moments when they are both trying to teach each other words. And that was when I felt like all of my languages, that, Amharic, Italian, and English, really came together in those moments. And that was an interesting thing to work with. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's sort of a related one, how should writers deal with authenticity in quotes, when writing about their country/heritage?
Just the fact that word is in quotes tells me that this is a very smart questioner. Like this person already knows their answer, but wants to hear it. I don't, what is authenticity? I don't understand. I really, this is a thing that we've talked about a lot in English literature. What makes something authentic, and whose definition of authenticity becomes the standard language, the standard definition, because authenticity is usually defined by those people in power. And yet there are many people and many groups and many languages that may not fall under that, or many cultures that may not fall under authentic. What defines authenticity is the way that a country chooses to identify itself, but that identity is often determined by who holds the power. And so I question that often, like whose authenticity, what are we calling original, and who has been left out, and what has been cleaned out in order to have that. So when someone says, well, people have said to me, well, you're not really American. Like, this literature is not really American. Do you count yourself American, or do you count yourself Ethiopian? Like, actually, I'm both. I'm 100% both. But my work, if I'm making you uncomfortable by calling myself American, maybe your idea of America is much too narrow, and we need to expand that. So that definition of authenticity is, for me, really, it's kind of problematic. But how should writers deal with it? I say, screw it. Like, it doesn't, you write what you want. What's authentic is what's you. And believe me, you will not be alone. When you start writing, you will realize that there's no story that stands on its own, that we are all parts of communities we haven't even seen. So write what you want.
Right. And I think to add to that, every story doesn't have to do everything or speak for everyone.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, I've really found as a person who gets very anxious when I write about Ethiopia in the context of journalism, or really at all, I sort of find a lot of solace in really zooming in and really focusing on specificity. Because an Ethiopian story, what does that mean? But a story about a specific set of people who are Ethiopians that I can handle, that I can wrap my head around.
Absolutely.
I think we might have time for one more question, I believe. Do you want to chat about the Solomonic Dynasty?
Oh, did somebody say that?
Yeah, there's a question here that says, I heard Haile's great-grandson had a role in The Lion King, and that's quite a twist for the Lion of Judah. I didn't know that. I'm going to have to go back and fact-check that. What do you think about the Solomonic Dynasty?
Really? Oh, you don't want to know. Oh, I don't. Let's not ask that, because I think I will get in trouble.
You can't give us a quick 3-minute answer for that?
Well, did he really have a role in The Lion King? And that's quite a twist for the Lion of Judah. That's funny, actually. Somebody has a sense of humor. But I mean, the Solomonic Dynasty, I don't know who can really trace their blood 3,000 years. Oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay. I won't put you further on the spot. I know that as soon as we wrap, I'm going to look up this Lion King role.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. But I do think that we have to understand the many myths that Ethiopia is built on. And we have to understand at the same time how those myths inspired revolutionary movements around the world. So in one way, it helped with these anti-colonial movements and this idea that Black people could unite under this myth of Ethiopia. So I appreciate it for that, but I don't know who was taking blood from King Solomon to keep it
in a
until
vial.
Now, right? So there's that, but the idea of it and what it's done to unify or create a sense of Pan-Africanism in some ways was positive.
There's a really great book about that called Black Land, and I can't remember the subtitle, but it's something like African America and Ethiopian imperialisms, or something sort of in that vein. But it's called Black Land, and I would, if you're interested in that kind of thing,
I will check that out. That would be great.
But if let's see, hold on, we have one more thing. Oh, okay. Somebody says, should writers be worried about the current market? I'll let you take that one.
Who asked that?
An anonymous person. Smart.
I think actually this current market, I was just talking to someone in the industry, meaning not on the writing side. Publishers are doing fine. It's actually lockdown. People are reading. Books are selling. Fiction right now is a little bit tough, but people are reading. Publishers are surviving. People are reading nonfiction. So what might be good in one year may be a little bit difficult in the next, but people are definitely reading. So writers, write what you want. The market will at some point, it keeps changing, but you'll be all right.
The idea that we'll be all right is a lovely note, I think, for us to end on. I'm going to hold on to that energy. So thank you so much, Maaza. It's been a delight.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you.
That was such a great note to end on. And everyone, please, keep reading. Read The Shadow King. Congratulations on such a wonderful book and being a finalist for the Booker Prize. And thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's event. It was a pleasure to host Maaza, Hannah, and welcome all of you. Please consider purchasing a copy of The Shadow King by visiting us at powells.com. And we look forward to seeing you at another one of our events again soon. Take care until then.
Thank you.